everybody, it's Paul again. Now that your harvest pot is up and running and your sauerkraut is in the works, I wanted to give you a few quick pointers along the way of how to take care of it, how to make sure you have the very best experience possible, and then at the end I'll show you how to harvest it and also how to do a cleanup so that you won't have any problems with mold. The most important thing in pretty much every stage of this is to make sure this little moat here is filled with water. That's the most important function of the harvest pot, is to keep all the air out of the inside, which prevents the mold. So you have to check it every day. And it's kind of tricky because these fermentation crocks will surprise you. Sometimes you'll go 3 or 4 days in a row without needing to add any water, and then suddenly overnight it'll be completely almost dry. So that's why you just want to, don't ever put it in a place where you're not going to check it every day. Beyond that, the only other thing to be aware of is that you might get some mold around the top of the moat here because that's exposed to air, and that's fine. As long as you're keeping it full of water and you're following the instructions that I gave you, you're not going to have any mold inside, but you will want to take care of that. The ideal temperature for fermenting sauerkraut is somewhere between 65 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So I keep this in a little room, like I said, that's off the kitchen. It's usually fairly cool. Seems like the ideal environment. With that, I'll just check in with you every couple weeks or so, and we'll make sure that if you come up against any problems, I'll show you how to deal with them. Here we are now again on day 15, and notice how very low the water is. So I'm going to fill it up. There we go. All right, it's day 22. Let's take a look at how our pot is doing because it's starting to get a little bit of mold built up. See how nasty that is? But not to worry because inside there is no oxygen. The only reason the mold is growing outside is because it's in the presence of oxygen. So your sauerkraut is still going to be perfect. It's not a problem. But I just want to show you that at this point it makes sense to clean off some of this mold just because it's kind of nasty looking. Okay, whoops, lucky I was over the sink. I'm going to wash this in the other sink with soap and water. But here, we can just turn the sink on a little bit. And you don't want to get rid of all this water up here because remember, that's an important part of the functioning of the pot. Just want to get rid of as much of the mold as you possibly can. And it doesn't matter if you overfill it here at this point. That will actually help you with cleaning it. One other thing that you can do if you're really worried about the mold around the outside of the harvest crock is you can put a little white vinegar in. So I haven't filled it up all the way with water. Just going to pour a little bit of white vinegar in here too. This is completely optional, but that will also help keep the external mold down. Okay, it's been almost 5 weeks. It's time for the grand unveiling as we harvest our sauerkraut. We normally let it go for 5 weeks, but this time our travel plans made it such that we need to harvest just a few days early. This lid hasn't been moved in the whole time that it's been fermenting, which is good because that prevents mold from getting inside there. And so now, let's see how it looks. And ta-da! See how high the brine is? The brine filled up the entire space that was available. And so because there was no air that got in there, you can see that there was no mold. So there really is no mold risk when you do it with this method. This is how I harvest the sauerkraut. I just use my hands. I have my gloves on, as you can see. I used to use a spoon, but it's actually a lot better if you can just have your hands there to put it into the jars. Here's the jar I'm going to use. This holds 3 cups. Now you can use a mason jar also if you choose, but we had so many of these left over from when we used to buy organic sauerkraut at the store that I just repurposed it for this. First thing we have to do is take the stones out. Now you're going to lose a little bit of your brine when you do that, but we'll try not to lose too much because the brine is delicious in the sauerkraut. And it takes a little bit of effort to get the stones out, as you can see, because we filled it up so full, but that's what you want. You want to put as much in there as you can. And notice how pink and beautiful this sauerkraut is. Or maybe it's purple, I don't know. One of my friends calls this Paul's Purple Powerkraut. Regardless, it's amazing. I'm just gonna rinse the stone off here real quick, and we'll talk about cleaning it in a minute. One more stone. This one's a little easier to get out. Okay, we'll try and scrape off all the sauerkraut that we can. You probably noticed that some of the sauerkraut was floating on top of the brine. The idea is to try and have as much of it as possible underneath the stones, but again, it's not a big deal if some of it is floating above because we've taken all the precautions to prevent any mold. That's the great thing about this harvest pot. I'll have a link to this fermentation crock right under the video. So let's start filling up a jar. Notice I'm doing this in the sink strategically so that it doesn't matter if I make a little bit of a mess here. Here is the result of our harvest. It turned out glorious as always. We've got 10 of these bottles, and I don't know if you can see, but they're all filled up to the very rim with brine also. So we had plenty of sauerkraut and plenty of brine for each one of these. And also, we really stuffed the sauerkraut down in there. So when we first started making sauerkraut, usually one harvest pot would give us about 12 bottles, but now we stuff it down in so we can get the same amount of sauerkraut in 10. Now let's go to the important part of cleaning up. First thing we want to do is we're going to wash our harvest crock and we're going to wash our stones. We're going to wash our stones with soap and water, but this is a really critical part to want to make sure that you avoid mold on. So after we've washed the stones with the soapy water, we're going to boil them for about 5 or 10 minutes in this mixture of half water and half white vinegar. We have 2 cups each, 2 cups of water, 2 cups of white vinegar. And then after that's done, we're going to put the stones in the oven. I'm going to preheat the oven right now while I'm washing it to 400. Once they're boiled, then we'll put them right into the oven and let them sit there for an hour. But we'll turn the oven off as soon as we put them in. So preheat it to 400 and then put the stones in and then turn it off. And after about an hour, they'll be nice and dry and very sterilized. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you try and make this sauerkraut. It really is amazing, and if you do, I think you'll love it. If this was useful for you today, I hope you give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel so you can keep up to date on my current content. Thank you.